Even after uncovering the terrifying realities of royal hygiene, the full scope of the suffering endured by these women is difficult to grasp. Imagine living every day under the constant scrutiny of a society that values appearance above all else. Every action, from the way a gown fell over your shoulders to the curl of your hair, was evaluated by hundreds of onlookers, advisors, and fellow courtiers. For royal women, life was a performance, and the cost of failing to uphold this illusion could be enormous, not just socially, but physically and psychologically. Baths, when taken at all, were fraught with danger, sometimes containing stagnant or contaminated water. Hair rituals were long and torturous, leaving women vulnerable to lice, fleas, and bacterial infections that gnawed away at both their comfort and their health. Every day became a careful balancing act between maintaining royal dignity and surviving the very processes designed to keep them looking immaculate. The irony of these practices is almost cruel in its intensity. Items designed for beauty and refinement often became instruments of pain, disease, and decay. Lead-based makeup burned the skin, turned faces into slow death masks over time, and left women permanently disfigured. Hair coated in animal fats, powders, and fragrances became a breeding ground for parasites, and the very tools used to style it carried bacteria that could trigger infections. Perfumes and scented oils masked odors but did nothing to protect health. Sometimes they worsened skin problems, caused respiratory distress, and exacerbated pre-existing illnesses. Despite these risks, women were compelled to conform because in royal courts, appearance was inseparable from power. The social and political pressures meant that rejecting these rituals was unthinkable. To be perceived as anything less than flawless was a political and personal disaster, threatening marriage alliances, court influence, and even survival. Royal women were therefore caught in a paradoxical trap. The very rituals meant to preserve beauty accelerated decay. Baths were infrequent or performed in contaminated water. Hair became an ecosystem of vermin. Clothing was layered so heavily that lice and fleas thrived undisturbed. Perfumes and powders added to the chemical burden rather than relieving it. In essence, the pursuit of beauty became a kind of slow self-destruction. And yet, these women endured with remarkable resilience. They adapted, learning subtle ways to cope with the discomfort, developing rituals and secret techniques to endure, and navigating a world in which their every move was a performance under relentless social pressure. Even the slightest sign of weakness, fatigue, or visible skin irritation could be interpreted as failing their station, an unacceptable flaw in the rigid hierarchy of court life. Beyond the personal agony, the impact of these hygiene practices extended to those who served them. Servants, attendants, and stylists were subjected to the same physical hazards, if not worse. They handled rancid fats, combed lice-infested hair, and worked for hours in stifling heat while surrounded by the overpowering stench of unwashed bodies and chemical perfumes. Their health deteriorated from exposure to parasites, bacteria, and the toxic mixtures used in cosmetics. Many suffered chronic illnesses, respiratory problems, and skin infections, yet they had little choice but to continue. As royal service was often the only means of survival for their families, the hierarchical system ensured that the suffering of the lower classes remained invisible, hidden beneath layers of silk, lace, and powdered hair. The luxurious exterior of the court masked a harsh reality. Human labor and human life were expendable in the pursuit of royal spectacle. The psychological toll on these women was equally severe. Living in an environment dominated by physical discomfort and social scrutiny created a constant state of tension and anxiety. They had to endure extreme smells, constant itching, and the knowledge that any misstep could be fatal to their social standing. Courtiers, visiting diplomats, and rival factions within the court scrutinized their every gesture. Even minor imperfections could lead to rumors, ostracization, or political manipulation. Over time, enduring such pressures required remarkable mental fortitude. The necessity of masking pain, concealing infection, and performing grace under unimaginable discomfort became a defining aspect of their lives. Their resilience was not only physical but deeply psychological, reflecting an extraordinary ability to navigate a system designed to both exalt and torment them. These rituals of filth also revealed the perverse cultural values of the time. Vanity, ritualized suffering, and public performance were elevated above health, comfort, and common sense. The more elaborate the hairstyle, the higher the perceived status. Even if the head beneath it was crawling with lice or bleeding from constant scratching, the heavier the layers of makeup and powder, the greater the admiration. Despite the long-term consequences of lead poisoning or skin disease, the physical realities were hidden, invisible to the casual observer. while the performance of perfection was what counted. It is chilling to realize that entire lives were dictated not by personal choice or well-being, but by the imperatives of a social order that prized image over life itself. This obsession with appearance also perpetuated a cycle of misinformation about health. While some physicians and advisors understood the dangers of lead, contaminated water, and vermin infestations, their warnings were often ignored in favor of tradition, aesthetics, or political expediency. In some cases, adherence to these beauty standards even served as a method of social control. Women who refused to conform were marginalized, ostracized, or punished subtly through exclusion from court events, marriage opportunities, or positions of influence. The cost of non-compliance was not only personal discomfort but diminished social power, effectively ensuring that the majority continued to participate in these dangerous rituals. One of the most tragic aspects of these practices is that the women themselves often understood the dangers but felt powerless to resist. Letters, diaries, and personal correspondence from the period reveal a deep awareness of the harm caused by powders, chemical cosmetics, and elaborate hairstyles. Yet the expectations of the court, the threat of scandal, and the rigid social hierarchies meant that their knowledge could not translate into action. They were trapped, forced to endure suffering in the name of beauty, status, and survival. This intersection of knowledge and powerlessness is a recurring theme in history, highlighting the ways in which social structures can manipulate human behavior and enforce conformity even against reason and self-preservation. The physical environment of the court magnified these pressures. Palaces, while visually spectacular, were often unsanitary and disease-ridden. Versailles, for example, housed thousands of people in a space designed for grandeur, not hygiene. Waste management was inadequate, plumbing primitive, and ventilation poor. In such conditions, the additional burden of toxic beauty rituals and infested hair compounded the risk of infection and illness. Diseases spread rapidly, yet court etiquette demanded that women maintain composure, grace, and elegance even as their bodies were assaulted by parasites, infections, and chemical exposure. The palace itself became a crucible, testing endurance, fortitude, and the capacity to uphold appearances under conditions that would have been unthinkable for ordinary people. Despite all of this, royal women demonstrated extraordinary adaptability. They developed hidden techniques to cope with lice, flea infestations, and the physical strain of heavy gowns and elaborate hairstyles. Specialized combs, hidden scratching tools, and coded hand gestures became part of their daily survival strategy. They learned to endure pain discreetly, to mask suffering behind smiles, and to navigate social interactions without revealing their discomfort. These adaptations were subtle but essential, allowing them to participate fully in court life while minimizing the immediate physical consequences of their routines. In this way, resilience became as important as beauty, with survival often dependent on ingenuity, patience, and psychological endurance. The ripple effects of royal hygiene extended far beyond the palace walls. Servants, artisans, and attendants were affected daily, exposed to the same parasites, toxins, and unsanitary conditions. They bore the hidden labor required to maintain appearances, often sacrificing their own health for the comfort and image of the elite. This created a hierarchy in which suffering was unevenly distributed. The visible display of beauty and refinement rested upon the invisible toil and discomfort of those who served. The palace became a microcosm of social and biological imbalance, with the health and well-being of many subordinated to the image of a few. These practices also offer a cautionary perspective on the dangers of cultural obsession with appearance. While modern societies may have different beauty standards, the underlying principle remains. When aesthetics, social expectation, or prestige are prioritized over health and well-being, suffering becomes normalized. Royal women endured extraordinary physical and psychological burdens to uphold ideals of beauty that were socially constructed and culturally enforced. Their lives serve as a testament to the extremes of human adaptability, but also as a warning of what can happen when society demands conformity at the expense of life, comfort, and dignity. In reflecting on the hygiene practices of royal women, we also see a profound human story. These were individuals navigating impossible standards, balancing public expectation with private suffering, and surviving in environments that tested the limits of endurance. Their stories illuminate the intersection of power, beauty, and social pressure, showing how even those who seem most privileged were subjected to immense hardships. The crowns and gowns may have been symbols of status, but beneath them were bodies enduring pain, decay, and relentless scrutiny. These women were not monsters, nor were they simply victims. They were human beings negotiating survival, identity, and societal expectation in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Ultimately, the horror and fascination of royal hygiene lies in its complexity. It was a world where beauty was both armor and weapon, where appearance dictated survival, and where human resilience was tested daily against pain, disease, and social expectation. These women were trapped in systems that demanded spectacle at the expense of well-being, and yet they persevered, leaving behind stories of endurance that continue to shock, horrify, and inspire today. Their lives challenge us to consider the invisible costs of social conformity, the dangers of valuing appearance above all else, and the extraordinary strength required to maintain dignity in the face of relentless physical and psychological assault. They remind us that behind every crown, every gown, and every powdered face was a human being struggling to survive in a world that demanded perfection, no matter the cost.